Hi, Cal travelers and friends. I'm delighted that you could join us today for another fascinating interview for our Cal Discoveries Travel Lecture Interview Series. Our interview today will focus on the enrichment lecturer and what they bring to our travel program. Our enrichment lecturers are chosen because of the knowledge and expertise they have regarding some aspect of the particular trip destination, thereby enhancing the educational component of the trip. Oftentimes their lectures complement the topics of the local lectures and guides. But before we begin, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Nancy McNeil, Assistant Director for Cal Discoveries Travel, and our guest enrichment lecturer with us today is Colonel Fred Rutledge. And Colonel Fred Rutledge, I'm going to be referring to him as Fred because he is a friend as well. He has had actually 3 different experiences with Cal Discoveries Travel. I'll mention those and then Fred can go on with more hats that he wears. He wears many. So he started with us in 2018 on his first trip as an Oxford participant, taking 3 of the Oxford classes as a scholar. The next one was as our enrichment lecturer and traveling historian, as he likes to call himself, for our 2019 Easy Company tour called England to Eagle's Nest. And the last one was as the tour manager for our 2019 Iceland cruise, where he had the opportunity to hear many lectures in a room with over 160 travelers. Fred is scheduled to be our Cal lecturer on our 2021 Scottish Isles cruise that was postponed from this year. So now I'm going to give the floor to my friend Fred and let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Hi, Fred.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you. That's great. I'll elaborate a little bit on the background there, and you can see I do wear a Scottish hat for this event. This is called a balmoral or a bonnet, and it's got a tory on top here and not a pom-pom because a pom-pom's French. So this is actually a tory. But speaking of many hats, played bagpipes with a couple of bands over the years. And I've been a lifetime member of the St. Andrews Society in San Francisco, which is a Scottish cultural group. St. Andrews Foundation, which promotes bagpiping throughout the western part of the United States, and involved with sister cities groups. Pleasanton has a sister city in Scotland and a Scottish city in Canada. So, and I've been suckered into being president of both groups, in fact, all 3 groups. And through my military connection over the years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to be a liaison officer with the Scots Guards, the Parachute Regiment, British units, also with several Canadian organizations. And in fact, being a bagpiper, I was drafted into the Canadian Scottish for a couple of events 20 some odd years ago. So I've done all that. And I'm involved with the Military Museum Command up in Sacramento, and provide a historical background, do oral interviews, and protect artifacts, things of this nature, and do a lot of community outreach, trying to capture the stories of veterans. And this has been one of my passions over the years is stories, and then also then passing those along. So yes, I'm a colonel. I'm still serving in the state military, and I don't play pipes anymore because I have a slight injury to my inner ear, but I do listen to them from a distance, and my current bagpipe band has me as the drum major, so I'm out front with the big mace, hoping that the lads follow me as we go down the street. Anyway, I've been to Scotland about 6 times. My mother, rest her soul, was a Mackay, and we're going to travel by Mackay country on the boat, on the ship, I should say. It's up near Caithness, so I'm looking forward to that as well. And I have a couple family members who plan to come along the trip. So there we are. Those are some of the hats.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think we could probably end it right there, and our travelers would have a very good idea as to what you might bring to our Scottish Isles cruise. But we're going to continue with some interesting questions and reveal a little bit more about who Colonel Fred Rutledge is. And before I do that, I'm guessing you might know where the photo was taken that's behind me today.
I heard it, Yarras up in the Orkneys or the Shetlands, if I recall. Yeah, one of those two. They're fairly similar, although one has more trees than the other one. So I have not been to this spot, and I'm looking forward to going there.
Aha, it's beautiful. I'm sure there's a lot of history that you will know about in regards to this place, but we thought it would be fun, and we do this for all of our interviews, have a photo of one of the destinations that our travelers will see on the trip. So,
Excellent. So this is my daughter's bedroom, so I hope that's okay.
yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Yes, we're all working remotely, at least most of us are. Well, let's get started, Fred. I'm wondering if you could tell us, what has your association been with Cal and or the Cal Alumni Association?
I graduated from UC Berkeley in 1978 with a bachelor's in history. My intention was to then get a teaching credential and to teach world history and geography at the secondary level. So after Cal, I had to put myself through there. And then I worked a little while to then get into San Francisco State to get my teaching credential. In the course of trying to get a permanent teaching position, I bumped into an old administrator of mine from high school who turned me on to adult education. So I went in as a teacher of teachers in adult education, because in those times, teachers were hired by their expertise. So if you were a picture framer, you were hired as a picture framer. You may not have had any teaching training. So I was helping them learn that. And then in the course of my position there, I was encouraged to get a master's in administration. So for 30 years, I was an adult school administrator, but I never lost any interest in history. So throughout that 30-year period, I was doing living history presentations, history of the American soldiers in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, capturing oral histories, doing presentations in various other forms. And some people recognize me as a possible Theodore Roosevelt lookalike, but I did several presentations at historical societies as Theodore Roosevelt in the 1903 trip with John Muir to Yosemite. So once again, that's the background. I've stayed very close to Cal. I'm just over the hill. So whenever I have an opportunity to go to a rugby game or have a meal or a pint at the faculty club, I'm over the hill there doing so. I support Cal as best I can.
Well, and as they say, once a golden bear, always a golden bear. Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.
Let's think of a little bit about the 3 trips that you were on with us. Can you tell us one of the most unexpected, humorous, and or memorable experiences that you had on one of those trips?
Well, goodness, that's going to be tough. But I would like to go back. My first trip was in 2011. The second one was in 2014, and that was the causes and consequences of World War I. And while that course was going on, it was the centennial of the start of the First World War. And so several of our field trips were related to activities in Britain, of importance. And the week before our class ended was the actual, we had a memorial service at Christ Church in Oxford, and it was showing the St. Paul's service on a big screen television. Now, in Britain, the comment was that the lights are going out all over Europe when the war began. So when we all left the church, we were given little battery operated candles because they didn't want people going around the streets with actual candles. And most of the lights in Oxford were turned off, and we put the candles in the windows as symbols of the start of the war. That triggered an interest in my going back. And so I had friends in the London Scottish, which was a reserve unit there, and they invited me to come back in 2018 for the commemoration of the end of the First World War. And so I was invited to actually march down Whitehall for the centennial of the end of the First World War. The Queen putting wreaths up, several of the royal family and other folks, and we marched by, and Princess Anne gave us a salute. So as a powerful event. That's one of those beyond bucket list kind of things. On a funny note, which I think is important because it involved two of your employees at the time. In 2018, I had the fun of taking my daughter Jean to Oxford Fantasists. Now, I was more into history, but the fact that J.R.R. Tolkien was one of the people we were looking at, as well as C.S. Lewis and Lewis Carroll and various others, I thought I'd give it a shot. So she and I took this course together. There was also at the Bodleian a wonderful display of Tolkien memorabilia and stuff. But on one beautiful Sunday afternoon, I said, let's go up the river and visit some pubs. And in doing so, we bumped into Haley and Maura. Where are you going? And I said, we're going fishing. Well, you don't have any gear. No, we're going fishing. Perch, trout. Those are the name of the two pubs we visited. And it was during our lunch at the Trout that I talked to them about my interest in doing more with Cal, and helped get linked up to the England to Eagles trip, which was tremendous. But it was just a kick having them, both them, the eyes just open wide fishing, you know. Anyway, it was just kind of fun. Everybody was in good humor.
Well, you know, thank you for sharing both of those. One quite a bit more serious, obviously, than the other, because I know that we all come home with many, many memories of Cal Discovery's travel experiences, and also the connections that we make with the people that are along on the trips with us. So thank you for sharing that.
I would like to just say one of the beautiful things about the Oxford trip is having a chance to actually stay there. And, you know, you're not rushed. You have a real good opportunity to absorb the town and be a member of the community in a way, which most tours you don't. So I'm very positive about it, and that's one of the reasons I'm keen and hope to go back again sometime.
Well, thank you, yes, for reminding us of the Oxford program. It is definitely one that is very unique to Cal Discovery's travel, and we have returning travelers. Many of them return year after year because of the uniqueness of the program. Let's talk a little bit about your role as an enrichment lecturer. What is your philosophy about your role as an enrichment lecturer, Fred?
Well, looking at this trip to Scotland, that'll be the first time I actually have an opportunity to be an enrichment lecturer. I've had the opportunity to be an enrichment storyteller, but my goal in working with the folks next year is to be a storyteller. Lecturer kind of conjures up this, you know, I'm on stage, I'm going to give you what happened in 1527 and then in 1528, and there'll be a test at the end of this. And I don't enjoy that at all. I think you need to be a good storyteller. I think vignettes need to be brought in. You know, one of my favorites, you know, being in Scotland, of course, and whiskey being a part of that, was in World War II, a ship filled with whiskey coming to the United States ran aground in one of the islands off the Hebrides. And the locals who had been on rationing found out these bottles were washing up in the crates on the shore, and they went down, oh, they picked them all up, and they were hiding them. I mean, these were hundreds of thousands of bottles. And it was turned into a film called Tight Little Island or Whiskey Galore. So that kind of story, you know, is about people. And that's the kind of stuff I would like to be able to present. So having had the trip to from England to Eagles Nest, even though I was not the lecturer, my opportunity to speak to people on the bus and, you know, when we're on the ferry going from England over to France, and then walking through museums, battlefield sites, and cemeteries, and talking to small groups, because you had spouses that went along who may not have had military experience or were not the historian. You know, why is this so important? And so having that ability to be with people and talk to them about what they're seeing and giving them an understanding is, I think, that's what makes it enrichment.
Great. Thank you for that example. And yours usually, I think, involve humor, which is always a nice ingredient to your, I'm not going to call them lectures because while they have historical significance and sometimes your own personal experiences, they really are unique to Colonel Fred Rutledge. And our travelers, I know, will really enjoy traveling with you and hearing the talks that you'll be giving along the way. Well, then how do you decide on the topics that you're going to give? I mean, you must spend some time preparing for the trip and what you're going to be talking about. Can you just give us a little rundown on what goes into that preparation?
Part of it is knowing that a lot of the people on the trip will be Americans. And probably a good percentage of those people traveling may have been to Scotland before, but maybe going for the first time to try to get a feel for the place. You know, maybe great uncle so-and-so was from Scotland. You know, I heard somewhere in my background, I've got this clan connection, whatever. So what I was looking at was trying to provide an easy to understand oversight in calling it Scots and other notables, because the Scots basically came from Northern Ireland. And in Latin, Scotii meant pirate. So that kind of gives you an idea how people felt about them. Versus the Picti were the painted people. They were the predominant people in Scotland. And over the Roman invasions, the largest tribe of the Picti were the Caledonii, and that's where the country got its name, Caledonia. And we still refer to the Caledonian societies and things of this nature. So that's been passed down for 2,000 years. And those pirates, you know, through marriage and various other things, ended up becoming the predominant tribe in Scotland. And of course, Scotland is named after them. But the fact that there's so many different people that kind of blended into what Scotland is, I think is important for people to understand. And not all, you know, MacLeod, for example, oh, that's a great Scottish name. Well, MacLeod actually goes back to the Norse because the Scandinavians were there. The Vikings were all over the coastal areas of Scotland. The Stuarts and the Bruces, well, they're Norman French, you know, so and I always enjoy the Scottish nationalist thing. It's like, well, you're a blend, you know, of people. You're not a single people. You need to embrace the fact you come from all different aspects. So that is the Scottish, the Scots and other notables. Then the Scottish culture and oddities, because face it, haggis is kind of an oddity. Bagpipes, wearing of the kilt, the deep fried Mars bars, various other things that the Scots do, which people might find rather repulsive and things. So I want to go through and talk about that. And part of the deal with the kilt is to explain how the kilt got to be what it is today, and also the tartan. I think one of the most fascinating things in Scotland, you know, when you look at the Battle of Culloden in the 1740s, you see Highlanders wearing multiple tartans. One guy wearing 2 and 3, 4 tartans, because there was no concise clan affiliation with tartans. It was basically what you could get. And it wasn't until after 1800 that there was an effort to try to bring some kind of cohesion and feeling together. Well, in the 1820s, there were only about 30, 40 recognized tartans. Now there's damn near 3,000. And you can thank Americans for that, because most of that expansion has been because of the American tourist dollar. So the Army has a tartan, the Marine Corps has a tartan, the Navy has one. You've got various regions in the United States and Canada, in fact, all over the world, that have their own tartans. This has all happened basically in the last 40, 50 years. And so explaining that to people is part of what I'm looking to do. And maybe pick on Mel Gibson a little bit, because he was painted and wearing kilts in the Braveheart when they weren't doing that. They were wearing saffron shirts for the most part until the 1500s. The whole kilt thing, well, he took a lot of liberties. Let's just go with that. So I'm not here to poke holes in bubbles and stuff like that. I just kind of want to give a little different perspective. So that's how I picked those two topics.
Great. Thank you so much for letting us know about sort of how you do this and what's involved. I think it's really going to give a unique component to this trip to our travelers. I know that when you're on the ship, they have a wonderful auditorium for lecturing. They will give you a time to do that. But I also know you well enough, Fred, that your talks and your engagement with our travelers will also happen on the shore excursions and other times at mealtime, so on and so forth. So I think our travelers can expect to really have opportunities to engage with you and have fun with you. They might see a kilt or a hat or some other kind of fun accessory to go along with your talks. I might imagine that.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Fred, for being with us today. My gosh, we've got such wonderful personal insight into the role of the enrichment lecturer for you as an individual. And I think that this is so exciting and will hopefully bring our travelers into the world of our enrichment lecturers along with our professors. It's going to be a fun and unique trip, I'm sure of that. We hope that the interview today has brought our travelers into the exciting educational world of Cal Discoveries travel. Please visit our website at alumni.berkeley.edu/travel, where you will find all of our 2021 trips, over 70 of them for next year. And also, Fred, as we mentioned, is scheduled to lecture as an enrichment lecturer, giving his personal talks on the Scottish Isles cruise from June 13th to the 21st, 2021. Thanks for joining us today, and go Bears.
Yes, valors, as we say in Latin. Go Bears. Cheers.
Cheers.